to our second episode, Make Me a Sanctuary. This is found actually in the book of Exodus chapter 25 verse 8. God commanded Moses. God said to Moses, let them make me a sanctuary. The reason is given so that he may dwell among them. Now the sanctuary came after when the covenant was made and people had entered into the covenant. The covenant that I'm talking about, we call it a Mosaic covenant, which was made before. The first part that we see is the announcement of the covenant, and then the preparation to receive the covenant. Then you have the law, which was spoken. We call it the Decalogue, with the 10 Commandments. And then afterwards, you have what we call the Book of the Covenant and the ratification of the covenant. That is basically the summary from chapter 19 to chapter 24. This is before chapter 25, where the sanctuary is brought into the picture. In order for a covenant to exist, there has to be two parties which come together. And these two parties, they have to agree in that covenant. And there's no covenant without conditions. Now, you talk about marriage. When two parties agree to be together in marriage, they are bound by the law. And anything that you do, we call it fornication or adultery. Why are we calling it adultery? It's because you have violated the conditions to stay in the covenant. In the book of Amos chapter 3 verse 3, the question was asked, can two walk together except they be agreed? So there has to be an agreement, there has to be a covenant made in order for two people to work together. A covenant has a conditions. Now, what was the conditions? The 10 Commandments became the conditions of the covenant. So that's why they had to prepare themselves to hear the conditions, and they had to agree that based on these conditions, we want to enter to this covenant and we will keep the conditions that are given there. Then later on in chapter 25, you have the sanctuary being introduced. So the sanctuary now becomes the process of the covenant, the process of maintaining the two parties in the covenant. Because without this sanctuary, the two parties cannot remain together forever. Man and God agreed to enter into a covenant. Verse 8, we are told that after when Moses spoke with the children of Israel, that if you want to be my people, my holy nation, kingdom of priests, chosen generation, a chosen people, if you want to be like that, the condition is you need to keep my law. And as you do that, me and you will be in the same covenant. He took the matter to the children of Israel. Verse 8, they said, all that the Lord has said, we will do. So that was an agreement to enter into the covenant. They said everything that God they are going to say to us, we are going to do, regardless of whether it favors our feelings or not, whether we like, whether it's in harmony with our desires or not. We are going to do it as long as you say it. And God says, all right, they've agreed to enter into the covenant. We call it a theocracy that was introduced there. Exodus chapter 24 verse 3, and Moses came and told the children of Israel, or the people, all the ways of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people with one voice they answered and said, all the words which the Lord has said, we will do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he rose up early in the morning, and then he builded an altar under the hill, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And verse 5 told us that, and he sent the young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen unto the Lord. And then verse 6 tells us, then Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood, and he sprinkles it on the altar. And then we are told in verse 8, and Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, this is actually after verse 7. So verse 7, the children of Israel repeated again, they said, all that the Lord has said, we will do. Then the blood was taken. So that blood was sprinkled on the people, and he said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord had made with you concerning all these words. So what was the purpose of the blood here? To ratify the covenant. So he has to sprinkle the blood on the people to say, we are ratifying the covenant with you. The covenant is sealed. Me and you have entered into this covenant. Now, one thing that the children of Israel have never realized, and which I think even in the case of us as humanity, it's a problem of human flesh. When you enter into a covenant, we also enter into a covenant with God. When we get baptized, we raise our hands, we said, Lord, what you are saying we will do. When the pastor is reading all these conditions and we raise our hands, we entered into a covenant. Before you entered even into the water, you said, I will do this. However, one thing that we don't recognize or realize in our life is that immediately after making a covenant, We break the covenant immediately. Why? Because it's a human flesh. We struggle. We cannot by our own power keep this covenant. We cannot by our own power adhere to the conditions to this covenant that we have agreed with God. And God says, can two walk together except they be agreed? The answer is no. We cannot walk together. But since we have entered into a covenant, God knew that we were going to break the covenant. And then he said, you know what? Make me a sanctuary. Now the sanctuary becomes God's remedy for sin. He knew that they were going to commit sin, but then I need to create plan B, so that if they break the law, I know how to solve it. The introduction of the sanctuary is located right or is given right after when man has entered into the covenant with God and the conditions were laid in place and the covenant was ratified with blood. Then he says, okay, make me a sanctuary. In Psalms chapter 78 gives us a reason why did God do that. Psalms chapter 78 verse 37, the Bible tells us, for their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. They were not faithful to the covenant, the children of Israel. Exodus chapter 32 it's a clear example of how men failed to keep the covenant. They actually break one of the 10 commandments. They make an idol. Now, after breaking the covenant, then there should be a separation. So God had already provided the means. But in verse 38, but he being full of compassion. Do you see why the sanctuary was brought into the picture? God's compassion for his people. Now God had compassion. He forgave their iniquity. He destroyed them not. Yea, many a time turned he his anger away and did not stir up his wrath. Now verse 39 is the key of Psalm 78. For he remembered that they were but flesh. For he remembered that they were but flesh. A wind that passed away. He remembered that this is a wind that passed away and cometh not again. So he knew that humanity is so weak. We have a human flesh, and it's so interesting that for us who are living in the last generation, we are the most degraded humanity that was ever created by God. And sinning becomes normal. It's usual. If you don't sin, you're not even normal in the society. And I'm speaking about where the generation in which, the time in which we are living is a time where sin is everywhere. On our phones, is there. Around us is there. When you look around you, you just see sin everywhere. When you go to the cities, town, and everywhere, sin is decorated, even in the walls of the buildings. Sin is everywhere. Then it means God understands us very well. He has already provided the means. The message of today is that God understood that the humanity is weak. And it was his mercy that he asked them to make a sanctuary so that he may dwell with them. The sanctuary was there to aid men to keep the covenant, to keep the conditions of the covenant. Without the sanctuary, man was not going to be able to maintain that covenant. Because when you break the covenant, God was supposed to destroy you. So then God says, no, just make a sanctuary so that I may dwell with them. When they break the law, then the sanctuary is there. There were lambs that were killed. The blood was shed so that a man is able to be maintained in the covenant. After sinning, you broke the covenant. God says, no, there's a way of bringing you back. I remember the book of Hosea. God says, return unto me. Return again. I can make you afresh. I can renew you again. I can cleanse you again. So when men sin against God, God will make sure there's a way that men return to the covenant. When men sin, God says there's a way. When men commit fornication, God says there's a way of coming back. When men lied, God says there's a way of coming back. So every day, God was in the business of making sure that man returns to him. Man is reconciled to him. The lambs, innocent lambs were dying, prefiguring the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. Let them make me a sanctuary so that I may dwell among them. And him dwelling among them was to make sure that the conditions to the covenant are maintained. So that if by any means we sin, we have an advocate, Jesus Christ, who stands for us there in the heavenly sanctuary. Now I know that there are those who say we do not need the sanctuary. You can see from what I've just presented to you that the sanctuary was necessary. And it is necessary today. What you need, people say, is only Jesus, but I'm quite shocked because Jesus is also in the sanctuary. His movements are just in the sanctuary. The Bible itself says that the way of the Lord is in the sanctuary. Therefore, friends, we need the sanctuary. And that's why we are studying the sanctuary. We are studying the sanctuary. We want to learn the ways of the Lord, how the Lord wants to save humanity, how we can at least live a life without disappointing God, how can we dwell with God. Truth is, you need Jesus who is in the sanctuary. In order for you to understand this Jesus, you need to understand the sanctuary. Because Jesus is in the sanctuary, his way is in the sanctuary. Therefore, You and I need the sanctuary. Without the sanctuary, there was no remission of sins in Israel. They had to shed the blood. The priest has to go into the sanctuary. And I'm so glad to read in the book of Hebrews chapter 8 and chapter 9 and chapter 10 that we have Jesus as our advocate. He's the high priest now in heaven. So in the heavenly sanctuary, not made by hands but made by God himself. Friends, the sanctuary was created for me and to show us how merciful God is, how he wants to dwell with us, how he wants to purify us, how he wants to strengthen us, to aid us to maintain the covenant that we have made with our Creator. Do you want to make a covenant with God, knowing very well that you won't keep it? But God is faithful. He said, that he will, by himself, remove the stony heart, give us the heart of the flesh, so that we may be faithful to the covenant. I like the book of Timothy. The Bible says that God is ever faithful, although we are not faithful. He's ever the faithful. So it's in the covenant you picture a woman and the husband. And the husband is ever faithful. The woman is always breaking the covenant. And this was demonstrated clearly in the book of Hosea. The entire book, Hosea was told to go and marry a harlot. Interesting. That was an acted parable. God wanted to demonstrate to them, because Hosea means the salvation of the Lord. And then Gomer means complete. When these two came together, it was a symbol that God's salvation is not complete without Gomer, a harlot. And the harlot in that case, it was the children of Israel. These are people who are breaking the covenant, sinners, who are practicing iniquity in secret in their blankets, where no one is able to see them. So you are a harlot in that case. So God's salvation without me and you is not complete. God wants you in order for this salvation to be completed. Therefore, return unto the Lord and make this covenant with God. And God will maintain this covenant with you if you want to do so. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we're going to delve into the sanctuary itself.